This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government, as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome to Barrie, City on the Move. I'm Arif Khan, and it's my pleasure to join you wherever you're receiving this content, at home on cable, online streaming. I'm glad to be able to be here with you today. In this series, we aim to explore the inner workings of government from a governance perspective, an operations perspective, as well as a partner relationships perspective. And today, I have a pleasure of speaking with John Brassard, Member of Parliament for Barrie South Innisfil. John, thanks so much for taking the time to join.
Thanks for having me, Arif.
Always a pleasure, and it should be noted you're here once again as the re-elected Member of Parliament. Congratulations on that. A hard-fought campaign, both locally as well as nationally, and let's get into some of that. You're back. Mm-hmm. The question is it deja vu, or is it a different story today?
Well, first of all, I'm really appreciative of the support that I got. I think I mentioned to you the last time I was on, this is my 19th year of representing the city, both as a city councillor and now as the Member of Parliament, and we'll see how long it lasts. It could be 4 years, it could be less. We're in a minority situation. This campaign locally was something like I've never experienced before, Arif, just the level of engagement of people. We had over 200 volunteers that were helping our campaign. Our sign count went up. We started with 1,200 signs. I had to order 1,500, another 300. And then with the large signs, there were probably another 400 out there. So that's 2,000 that were committed either on residential properties or businesses. And you saw the big Curbex signs during the campaign as well. So the level of engagement and involvement was like nothing I've seen in my previous 3 election campaigns. It was quite something to see people step up and participate in the electoral process. So I was fortunate. I won by 13,000 votes. Really appreciate the commitment of, obviously my Liberal opponent, John Oldhouse, who I have a lot of respect for, and we had a couple of other candidates, NDP and PPC, but I was really, really pleased with the results, pleased more so with the level of engagement.
Yeah, and I appreciate where you're coming from in saying that the level of engagement, there was a lot of passion. A lot of people thought that a lot was on the line. Now the results are what they are. Yes, you were re-elected, which is, congratulations to you. But on a grander scale, the results are not obviously what you were hoping for.
No, they weren't. And look, I'm not going to lie and tell you that losing does suck. Obviously a 4th election campaign, and I've been on the opposition benches for all 4. There were a lot of factors that went into the national campaign. Obviously, we saw with the impact that the President of the United States had on the campaign. We saw the NDP collapse. They went from 24 to 7 seats. We saw, almost a similar situation proportionally in Quebec with the Bloc Québécois. But there are some positives, and I don't want to focus so much on the negative, but there were some positives. We saw a level of engagement across the country. We saw a movement towards conservatism from young people in particular, working people. We managed to increase our vote count, and as a result, managed to increase our seat count.
Let me jump in for a second, though. You mentioned the movement towards conservatism of the younger vote. If we look back at 2015, that was part of the, if you want to say, the brilliance of the strategy of the Liberal campaign in terms of attracting that younger vote, a formerly disengaged, disinterested voter. Why the shift from 2015 to 2025, 10 years later?
Well, I think we talked about this the last time I was here. We've seen a level of despondency among young people, losing hope. Many young people are doing exactly what they've been told to do. They're going to school, getting an education, coming out, expecting to work hard, which they do, but not having an opportunity as a result of all of the path that they've followed. We've seen many young people who are working 2 or 3 jobs. The issue of home ownership became a big one. Housing affordability and housing attainability became a big issue throughout the course of the campaign. So a lot of young people were gravitating to the message and the policies that we were putting forward and Pierre Poilievre was putting forward as it relates to housing affordability, attainability, the level of tax cuts, and restoring the hope and promise of our nation. And that was really the big theme of our campaign. That's why we saw a lot of people, especially young people, gravitating to the message. We saw a lot of working class families as well because they've been devastated by 10 years of failed economic policy that has made life more expensive. Whether it's the affordability crisis that people are living through, the inflation crisis, the carbon tax, all of these things added up to, from a policy perspective, something that we could put forward in front of Canadians that they were I said gravitating over, but they were coming to lower taxes, for example, right? Those were things that were really popular with a lot of young people and working class people, and this is why we saw our vote count increase the way it did.
So, and I think it's interesting to actually examine that last point that you just made regarding the vote count. The seat count did increase. There are those who will quite honestly and reasonably say, well, the Conservatives lost. They failed to gain government, and in fact, the leader lost his seat, et cetera. You did gain seats. The Conservative Party did gain seats. Here's a question. From my perspective, just watching, I saw this being an election more so than in my recent memory of where people had to decide, am I going to vote for the leader? Am I going to vote for the platform? Am I going to vote for the local candidate? How did you see that, both locally as well as, maybe that was way too easy of a softball for you regarding the local, but on a national strategy, what did you see happen there?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of all three. Look, I was hearing it at the door that, I love your policy. I like you. There were some things about Pierre that people were not comfortable with. And when I would argue back with people, not argue, but we discuss the situation. I would always tell people Pierre wasn't looking to be invited over for dinner or to have a drink with you. He was asking for your help to fix the problems of the last 10 years. And those problems started long before Donald Trump became the President of the United States. And so by putting forward a policy platform that was addressing the crime issue, for example, where we've seen crime pervade our streets, the housing crisis, that young people can't afford housing, stopping the immigration crisis that has caused many problems related to our healthcare system being in crisis. All of those policies you couldn't argue against, and so I think what happened was people, particularly some of the older generation, weren't comfortable with maybe some of the things that we were doing. We're more comfortable gravitating to what they know because of, in many ways, a fear factor that was going on related to Donald Trump. And I would remind people all the time that many of the problems, including the crime that's pervading our streets, were happening long before Donald Trump became the President of the United States. So the policies that we were putting forward would have addressed many of those issues. They were also designed to insulate us from the threats, tariff threats that were coming from the President of the United States, and it was really about unleashing our economy, right? Those policy, I was very, very proud of the policies that we put forward to Canadians because I think they were very real policies that would have not just unleashed the power of our economy, but also helped many of those people who over the last 10 years of that failed economic policy of the Liberal government would have helped them as well, would have kept more money in their pockets, would have allowed the prospect of home ownership. All of those things that we put forward were meant and designed to not just insulate us from the threats from the United States, but also to unleash the power of our economy. We talked about not being timid. We talked about being bold and ambitious as a nation. The time for timidity was over. We talked about this many, many times, about unleashing the power of our natural resource sector, getting our products to market and feeding the world with clean Canadian energy. All of those policies I was very, very proud of, and still to this day think that we had the best policy platform. Didn't work out at the end.
So, well, and let's explore that a little bit. And by the way, this is not going to be a conservative show, but I do want to, we're sitting. You are the representative for the area in Ottawa, and you did win. I think you said by a margin of about 13,000 votes. Yep. So obviously there was a clear message to send John Brassard back to Ottawa. That being said, let's look at this just for a second here. Prior to January 20th. And prior to Trudeau announcing his intention to step down, the Conservative brand, led by Pierre Poilievre, was on track. I don't know if it was by 26 points or something like that, but a large margin on track to form government and form government by way of a majority. You neither formed government and neither by a majority. My question is, what changed? Obviously, we know Trudeau wasn't there. Obviously, we know that Trump came in. But in terms of, I guess maybe the dust has settled and the party has had a chance to maybe audit what went right, what went wrong. What would you be doing differently now as a party to sort of win the confidence of the nation?
Well, I think you got to look back on the situation, what happened. Obviously, proroguing Parliament was a smart strategy by the Liberals. I don't necessarily agree with the prorogation. In fact, in 2015, when they ran, they said that they would never put forward prorogation in order to avoid the scrutiny of Parliament. We were dealing with a lot of issues, not the least of which was the SDTC scandal, where we were holding the government to account. Parliament was seized because they weren't releasing the documents related to, what was hundreds of millions of dollars of Liberal-connected insiders that were benefiting as a result of decisions that they were making, and clearly were in conflict of interest. So, a lot of those things were happening. Prorogation limited the amount of accountability and transparency that the government was able to put forward to Canadians because they didn't have the opposition fulfilling its constitutional obligation to hold the government to account. So a lot of those factors kicked in. Obviously, the situation with Donald Trump and the uncertainty with tariffs, that became a big factor during the election. I think, look, we're not going to, even now, we're not going to stop holding the government to account. We have that obligation. Perhaps what should change or can change is the tone and tenor by which we do it. There are issues of substance that we're going to have to focus on. And look, the Liberal government's not out of the woods. There are many, many situations that they're going to be facing with respect to the economy. Just in the last week, we saw Canada's credit rating downgraded. We've got massive debt and deficits, $60 billion deficits when the fall economic statement was tabled last fall. We've got $1.4 trillion in debt. During the campaign, Mark Carney said that he was going to spend an extra $200 billion. Okay, so, how's he going to spend it, and where's that money coming from? Is it going to come from taxation? So one of the most disturbing things that's happened over the course of the last couple of weeks is the government indicating that they're not going to have a budget until the fall. And so, that's problematic on many fronts.
So we're going to pick this up after the break exactly on that talking point, which is what I'd like to do in terms of, so what now? So where do we go from here? And I'd like to explore some of that with you. You mentioned the fall economic statement being made, so that's approximately 6 months away from now. I want to talk with you and learn from you of what we can anticipate will happen during that period. And a few other items in terms of, will there be discussion and consent on the budget? Hold your thoughts.
Okay.
But when we come back from the break, more from John Brassard, who's our re-elected member of Parliament for Barrie, South Innisfil, joining me, and we're going to discuss, I think we've covered what went wrong in all fairness, what didn't go right, and I want to really discuss with you, John, what's coming next. So stay with us for more from John Brassard right after this break. Welcome back to Barrie, City on the Move, and I'm enjoying a conversation with Member of Parliament John Brassard, representing Barrie, South Innisfil. Thanks so much again for being here. We were talking before the break really about sort of a bit of a recap, what went right, what went wrong, the takeaways, and now that the dust has settled, obviously you remain, I guess it would be the King's Loyal Opposition, member of the King's Loyal, not the Queen's anymore.
His Majesty's Loyal Opposition.
His Majesty, yes. Okay, all right, thank you for that clarification.
All right.
And the question is really, where do we go from here? And before the break, you sort of left off on the fact that it was advised, we are now aware that there will be no budget tabled for discussion until the fall economic statement. And really my question is, what does that mean?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, or the multi-billion-dollar question, if you will. I think we got to look back to, Arif, we didn't have a budget, we haven't had a budget since April of 2024. If you recall, the fall economic statement that was presented to the House was a bit of a fiasco. It was the day that the finance minister announced her resignation from cabinet. It was also the day that we found out that they had blown past their deficit projections of $40 billion to $62 billion. So the fall economic statement was effectively table dropped. There was no opportunity for debate, no opportunity to ask questions. It was just basically dropped on the table. So we didn't really get a full indication of where the state of the country's finances were, with the exception of those top-end numbers. So here we are. Convention around Parliament is that the budget is presented in April. So obviously with prorogation and the shutting down of Parliament, there was no budget that was presented. So we still don't know over the course of the last 6 months what the spending projections or what the impact on the debt and deficit has been, given the backdrop of the Trump retaliatory tariffs. So, obviously, we need to see a budget. I don't know if you recall, but during the one of the debates in the election campaign, Mark Carney had said a plan beats no plan, right? He was accusing the Conservative Party of not having a plan. Well, clearly we did. We spoke about that in the first segment. But here we are, not having a plan. And a budget is a plan. It gives an indication to Canadians how the government is going to spend their money, where the revenues are going to come from, any increases in spending. The government indicated that during the course of the election campaign that they were going to deal with or increase spending by $200 billion. Well, where's that money coming from? What's it going to go to? How is it being how is that revenue going to be generated? The other aspect of this was that the retaliatory tariffs, according to the Liberal Party during the election campaign, was going to inject $20 billion in additional revenue. Well, we heard over the course of the last couple of weeks that they've dropped the retaliatory tariffs, so that's a $20 billion hole in the budget. So what we're saying is present a budget to Canadians, even if it's an interim budget. In the backdrop of not having anything for a year, Canadians need to know where the money is going to be spent, more so where the money is coming from, whether that's going to mean an increase in tax revenue as well. And so we've offered to the government to extend the sitting of Parliament. We go back May 26th. So we've got a 4-week session of Parliament. The government, within its power, can extend the sitting of Parliament if they want to go through the budget, because the principle of no taxation without representation still exists in our democracy and is a big part of our democratic institution. So we'd like to see a budget before a fall economic statement happens. Now, a budget is a dynamic document. If there are some changes that need to be made in the fall, then the government can come to Parliament and request and seek those changes. But we need a budget. in the backdrop of the fact that we haven't had one now for a year.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, a budget is a plan and it is a guiding document, and it does not, yes, you can miss your target, you can beat it, or you can, fall behind, but it's an opportunity to course correct when that happens. Now, I have a couple of questions for you, actually, just based on what you talked about there. First things first. For anybody who's not 100% crystal clear, the difference between a debt or debt and a deficit.
So a deficit is based on operating expenses throughout the year. The government projects what they're going to spend. If they spend more than what they project, then that becomes an operating deficit. In the fall economic statement, as I mentioned, the government had indicated in their budget that they were going to have a $40 billion deficit. I mean, any deficit is bad. It really eats up on other services, core services, the amount of interest that you pay on debt, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But in the fall economic statement, it was $62 billion in deficits when they had projected $40 billion. So they basically blew through their fiscal guardrail, their own fiscal guardrail. A debt is how much money the government accumulates in order to meet their expenses. And just to put it in context, we are now $1.4 trillion in debt. The debt in this country has doubled in the last 10 years. In fact, we've accumulated more debt in the last 10 years than we have in all of since our Confederation. Okay, so it's a significant number. Now let me put that in context, just so people understand. You pay interest on that debt, and we've gone through a period of high interest rates, and as I mentioned in the first segment, Canada's credit rating has dropped just in the last couple of weeks. So we're effectively going to be paying more interest, okay? We now pay more in interest on our national debt than what we transfer to the provinces for health care. Now think about that for a second. So
what could we be doing with our money?
Well, and that's the question, right? And this is the question that we were putting before Canadians. We have to get our fiscal house in order. We can't keep accumulating the amount of debt. Now, I understand we have some threats to our economy, but we have to grow our economy. We have to make sure that we unleash the power in every aspect of what Canada can provide. Canada should be the wealthiest nation on earth based on not just the resources that we have, but the capital and ingenuity that we have and innovation that we have in our country. We talked about that throughout the course of the campaign. That we're on an unsustainable path, and when I mention about the government facing some headwinds, there are going to be some significant headwinds and decisions that are going to have to be made in order to deal with the deficit situation and the debt that we've incurred. And if we don't have a budget, how are we to know how much that deficit has accumulated and how much that debt has accumulated over the course of the last fall economic statement, especially given the fact that we've been facing tariffs, our economy and our productivity in our economy has really declined. We've got loss of capital investment that's fleeing this country. Almost $500 billion of investment has fled south to the United States. We're seeing our auto sector under threat, which is significant for our region because of Honda. So we need to see a budget. The government should have enough information right now to provide a budget to Canadians, if not on top line spending and revenue and deficits, but how to deal with the significant challenges that we're facing right now, where that money's going to go.
John, bring this a little bit closer to home to my kitchen table for me, though, a little bit. Some of the numbers that we're talking about here, $1 trillion, $1 billion, those numbers are so big that many people I speak with,
I know.
It's just so big that I can't even wrap my head around it, and therefore I don't wrap my head around it, because what I can wrap my head around and what I'm struggling to wrap my head around is what it takes to run my household, whether I own or whether I rent, my car payment, my job, my grocery bills, my utility bills, et cetera, those types of things. And so when you're talking about $1 trillion in debt and $62 billion in deficit, what do I care? Like it's not in my lifetime, and it's not in my universe. So why should I care if it's just going to be kicked down the road?
Well, a simple equation. When debt increases, it has to be paid for in some way. And it's the same thing for government operations. It has to be paid for, and when you incur the type of deficits, revenue minus expenses equals income in a general business sense. In a government sense, revenues minus expenses, if you have more or less revenue coming in than what your expenses are, and we've seen an increase in the bureaucracy, and many reasons why we've seen the level of deficits that we have, you got to get the money from somewhere. And that means in many cases, taxes go up as well. And so, whether it's consumer taxes that have to increase, income taxes that have to increase, employment taxes, there are measures that the government will need to impose in order to create these revenues when we've seen productivity decrease and we're not getting the type of revenue and capital investment and investment period in our country. I said on council at one time, and I think you were on council, when we were dealing with some pretty big structural issues as it relates to capital investment. Mm-hmm. I mean, the taxpayer is not a never-ending revenue stream. You can't keep going to people when they're already paying 40, 50, 60% of their income taxes, when they're struggling to get by because of consumption taxes or consumer taxes or the carbon tax, which was paused conveniently at the beginning of the campaign. The legislation hasn't been reduced, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see that come back. Even the industrial carbon tax, who's going to pay for that? It's the end consumer, Arif, that ends up paying for that because the industry will just pass that on down. So that is the significant impact. And when, the interest on the debt, as I mentioned earlier, is going towards that interest and not going towards the things that are important to Canadians, like healthcare, education, looking after the people that are most vulnerable in our society, if we're not creating the revenues to make up for the interest in that debt, then our society will not benefit as well. In fact, I suggest that our society will degrade because the very things that people need and want, healthcare, education, feeling secure in their homes or being able to provide food on their table, all of that becomes riskier as a result of massive government debt and deficit because they have to get the money from somewhere. And I suggest to you that people can least afford it now, given the affordability crisis, the housing crisis, the mortgage renewal crisis, which you're intimately aware of is having an impact here in 2025. All of those things, we can't keep going back to the taxpayer. We have to get government under control, not just from a spending standpoint, but also from an operations standpoint, or else we're heading down a path that none of us want to go down.
So when we come back from the break, I do want to talk to you more about that, the plan or the lack thereof, whichever it is. Mm-hmm. Many of the campaign talking points of what the plan might be. Both leaders actually talked about energy and unleashing energy, mm-hmm. and obviously maybe from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. Also take a look at the impact on interprovincial trade barriers as well, that many people were surprised to learn about, that they actually existed.
Starting to understand it now.
Yeah, exactly. So when we come back from the break, I do want to pick this up regarding
Sure.
budget, the ability to deliver services, the ability to make life affordable or not so affordable, and what mechanisms may be available to see our way forward positively. How about that?
Perfect.
Stay with us for more from John Brassard right after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and John Brassard, Member of Parliament for Barrie South Innisfil, and I are having a conversation on really where do we go from here. We know how we got here. We're starting to get an understanding of how we got here, but the question is what's next. And the successful candidate was Prime Minister Mark Carney, who ran on a campaign that was full of optimism, and one of the things that he left Canadians wanting to trust in was the idea that the way forward included investment. How are we going to pay for these things that were in the campaign promise? And his words were investment. Many Canadians might have said, that's a great word, it sounds great. What does that look like? What's the plan? What does that mean? Today, a couple of things I think are worth noting. We're pretty much the day after the election, the markets had a reaction. And not only did the markets have a reaction, which some people could say, well, those are just big corporations and who cares, that doesn't affect me. Separate from the markets having a reaction were economists having a reaction. The words out of the CIBC and TD and BMO economists included immediate recession. We're in the direction of a recession. Investment was the pledge for repayment. The reaction so far, we're heading towards recession. We won't see a budget until the fall. What happens in the next 6 months? And how does spending happen without discussion and debate?
Well, and it brings back to the important point, Arif, of the need for a budget. A budget is a plan, so we need to see what the plan is. Obviously, we're in a current situation. The government has within its purview all of the issues that we're facing, the spending, where things are at. So that's, just to reemphasize the need for a budget at this point, given the scenario that you talked about. The government does have within its means the ability to spend money without government approval. The main estimates are something that have been approved already. There are obviously special warrants that the Governor General, this is all sort of minutia type stuff, but the budget really is something that's presented before parliamentarians, line by line. Oftentimes we'll see a budget presented as an omnibus budget, but the government has also already signaled that they're going to reduce the income tax rate by 1%. They're going to do that through a Ways and Means motion and present that to Parliament as soon as we get back. From our perspective, any tax cut, anything that helps on the issue of affordability, which is something that we talked about specifically during the course of the election campaign. Our tax cut would have been much bigger. But it's going to be difficult for us not to support, and I wouldn't want to support as a member of Parliament because I know how much people are hurting, not just in my riding of Barrie, South Innisfil, but right across the country. So any tax cut is welcome. The problem with the Ways and Means motion is we don't know what else is going to be in it. I've seen historically over the last 10 years that I have been here, whether it's budget, whether it's through motions or other means, the government will often try to put some sort of poison pill in a motion to either get the opposition to not support it or to embarrass the opposition. And so, we're at a point right now, and it's critical that we work together in order to help Canadians who are facing a financial crisis and affordability crisis, but also to make sure that our economy is moving forward. And many of those measures that we talked about earlier, like unleashing the power of our natural resource sector with the 3rd and 5th largest reserves in the world, those are measures, whether it's reducing interprovincial trade barriers, all of those things we should be working towards. Now, the government has signaled that they're going to do that, although mixed messages. We hear from, Stéphane Guilbeault, minister in Quebec, who says no more pipelines, and yet the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is saying, yes, we're going to build pipelines. So, we've been seeing some mixed messages from the government, from the Prime Minister particularly, and his ministers over the course of the last couple of weeks. Look, from our standpoint, anything that helps Canadians, either from a tax relief standpoint that helps control the cost and spending of government and that unleashes the power of our economy, including those small and medium-sized enterprises that we're so blessed to have here in the city of Barrie and in the town of Innisfil. Anything to do that, it'd be hard not to support those measures.
I have to ask this question because we've seen division. There has been division, and there are those who could say, leaders of all of the parties probably could have done a better job to reduce that divisiveness in their campaigns. Two questions. One, the idea of trust. You mentioned omnibus bills, you mentioned poison pills, you mentioned some things that get buried in there to embarrass someone for supporting or not supporting.
Yeah, I've seen it on multiple occasions over the last 10 years. So
about trust. Can Canadians believe that what we're seeing in the news, that what we're seeing in Parliament being put forth, tabled, for example, that what we see in black and white, or what we read about in summary of the black and white, is exactly the intention of the government or of the mover of the motion? Or is there something sort of that what's the long game? What's the other thing that we're not being told?
I think ultimately that's up to the government. Arif, they hold the levers of power. They're the ones that are going to present bills in front of Parliament. They're going to present motions. We're going to deal with issues at committee. Ultimately, it's up to the government. I mean, our job as His Majesty's loyal opposition is to hold the government to account. I mean, that's our constitutional obligation. On issues that we can agree on, issues that benefit Canadians, like tax relief, like supporting our businesses, our large, medium, and small-size enterprises, like unleashing the economy and what's best for Canada, increasing our productivity, creating a tax regime that spurs on investment, capital or otherwise, in our country, that doesn't allow for investment to flee, to allow that confidence in our Canadian economy and the investors that are looking to invest in this country. All of those things that we can agree on. I mean, it's not an ideological thing to want what's best for your country. It's the manner in which it's proposed that, you know, the path that we get there. And so if all of those things come to pass and the government is sincere in what it says it's going to do, it would be hard-pressed for us as an opposition not to support that. I mean, look,
can all the parties work together, John?
well, we're going to have to, aren't we? Right? As long as Arif, the intent is sincere. I mean, there were like, and I go back to some of our policy proposals. I mean, they were phenomenal policy proposals to, I don't want to rehash it here because we went over it in the first segment, but to unleash the power of the Canadian economy, to reduce taxes, to, you know, reduce immigration levels to a point that was sustainable in our country, to, you know, help with the bureaucracy, help with, you know, control the debt and the deficit. All of those things were phenomenal platform items. In many cases, the Liberals mirrored some of those. I mean, they may not have mirrored them to the extent that we wanted, but, you know, it would be hard-pressed for us as an opposition party to not support the government if many of those policy proposals actually came to life, right, either through legislation, regulation, or motion. So, you know, our job, not just to hold the government to account, but to make sure that we're moving this country on a path forward so that that hope and promise of our nation, the very thing we spoke about, especially for young people and for working class Canadians who are struggling right now, trying to keep a roof over their head or trying to put a meal on their table, those are the folks that we were talking to in this election, and we are going to do everything we can to not just support the government if their intent is true, and to, you know, implement many of those policies that help relieve the burden of taxes and affordability on Canadians. It would be foolish of us not to support that era.
So 5 and 3 years ago, and even this year, we talked about the fact that the trajectory of inflation, the trajectory of housing bubbles and overvaluation, et cetera, was unsustainable, that it was going to come back and haunt Canadians, sort of that trajectory, all based on policy, whether it's through immigration or other monetary policy, for example. Today we are living it. We are seeing the historically high rate of default, the historically high rate of the inability for Canadians to meet their obligations. They're less than $200 away.
All of this was happening before Donald Trump became the president of the United States, Arif. Let's remember that.
Right. I remember it because I see it on the daily.
Right.
My point is, today we're sitting in a place where, and I'm dealing with clients right now, where they owe more on their home than the home is worth. They have more mortgage on the home than the home is worth. Add to that the fact that you've talked about earlier, the auto sector. There are banks that are saying, you know, risk analysis. Doesn't matter if your credit's good. If you're in the automotive sector, you have a red star beside your name. If you're in the construction trade sector, you have a red star beside your name. Doesn't matter what your loan to value is or what your credit rating is, it's the uncertainty that the banks are actually shying away from. They're not lending to those people.
and I can speak to that uncertainty, having just come through an election campaign. I was standing on a street in southwest Barrie, and I had knocked on somebody's door, and I could see a car pulling up, and a gentleman was following me. He was in the construction business, okay? 2 days earlier, he had his truck repossessed. He was about to lose his home because he was a framer and had not been able to get any work because of the downturn in the construction industry. Okay, a framer, highly skilled, should be earning a good wage, hasn't been working for months. Those are the types of stories that I heard, and that's one, and there are many throughout the course of the campaign that I heard about. It's really concerning. Look, for the next 6 to 9 months, Mark Carney is going to have a little bit of a honeymoon period. He was with the Pope, we've got the G7 coming, all of that stuff. That doesn't take away from the underlying fundamental problem that we have within our economy, whether it's low productivity, whether it's the flight of capital to the United States and other countries, the interprovincial trade barriers which need to be removed, the fact that we're holding back our natural resource sector, Arif. Those are things that are going to have a significant impact. The tariffs on the automotive sector and those 4,300 people that work locally at Honda who have that fear and that uncertainty that's going on right now. These are important issues to people, and it's why I hope the government, the new government, actually implements many of the policies that we talked about, that they copied. Maybe they have their own ideas, but it's for the sake of those people that we better come up with solutions because, again, all of this stuff was happening, crime pervading our streets, affordability crisis, housing, immigration, just the list is long of the many, many structural problems, the debt, the deficit that we were having in this country, all before Donald Trump became the president of the United States, and we have to fix those problems.
When we come back from the break, John, I want to sort of put a bit of a bow on it regarding really the local impact, your relations here with the city of Barrie municipally as well as our provincial partners as well. So just, everything that you just talked about, how are we going to collectively work together?
Sure.
As well as work together with your colleagues in Ottawa. So stay with us. More from John Brassard right after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Member of Parliament John Brassard and I are having a conversation on really the trajectory, what's next, what can Canadians anticipate. There's a lot at stake. It is sometimes hard for us to wrap our heads around, global affairs and international relations and the overall national debt in an economy when we've got so much that we're focusing on that is taking our attention right at home. And really, with that in mind, bringing it a little bit closer to home when mayor and council were sworn in, pretty much their first order of business was to reach out to you and invite you to a Team Barrie conversation with both your member to the north, Doug Shipley, who represents Barrie, Springwater, Ormondonte, as well as MPPs Khanjin and Downey. Bring this closer to home. We've had a conversation around policy. We've had a conversation around debt and deficit, but really it comes down to affordability, livability, survivability, the ability for us to put food on our table. And I really want to, find out from you, once more in a position of opposition, how can you work together with your colleagues to just, to find the common ground, to find the common goals, and lobby accordingly, if you use that word?
Yeah, look, the issues on a national level are very much issues on a local level. I mean, housing affordability, housing attainability, the affordability factor in general, cost of groceries, inflationary factors, the cost of gas, all of those things add up, not just at a national level, but at a local level. And so obviously my job is to advocate on behalf of the people that I represent in Barrie, South Innisfil. I'll continue to do that. It speaks to building relationships in Parliament. There have been issues where I've, for example, example, I worked with Minister Bill Blair when he was defense minister. He's no longer defense minister, on some of the housing issues out at Base Borden. The rapid housing initiative, the Accelerator Fund, for example, advocating on behalf of the city to receive its share of the $26 million that it eventually received. There are many significant challenges locally that need to be addressed, and so my job as the representative, even in opposition, is to try to work with the government for the benefit of the people that I represent, and that includes both mayors and council in the city of Barrie and the town of Innisfil, who I have tremendous relationship with. Mayor Nuttall and members of council, we're constantly communicating on issues that are important to them. Same with Mayor Dolan and her council in Innisfil. There's ambitious growth plans here in the city of Barrie. We see what's happening in the south end, and there's talk about expansion in the north end. Obviously, Doug will be involved in that, but anything to do with south end, whether it relates to infrastructure or any other issue, that's my job to advocate on behalf of the city if and when there are federal dollars that are available for that growth and for that planning.
So in the last 5 years, we saw a lot of migration towards the region out of the GTA. The GTA is suffering historically low resale value. Building permits for new inventory is literally at a standstill. In fact, many failing projects that have had to return their deposits, et cetera. Rental rates are low, or occupancy is high and rates are low. They're struggling.
Yep.
And here we are. We're just barely an hour outside of the GTA, and we're seeing pressures to build. We're seeing pressures to put a hospital in the south end because of growth out of the GTA. That's tax revenue. That's capital and infrastructure revenue that's got to come from somewhere, for example. And I recognize that that's wholly or mostly provincial.
Yep.
The question is the previous immigration policy still has a lasting impact on where we see ourselves today. We see that with housing availability, with housing affordability, but we also see that with the colleges across Ontario, if not across Canada, where suddenly now having reduced their ability to issue visas, those colleges were operating on a business model that relied on that increased revenue from international students, about 300%. Compared to a local, a domestic
It was fairly
enrollment.
significant, yeah.
Very significant.
Yeah.
So we're seeing some of these things now starting to unravel because the plan actually was unsustainable, and now we're dealing with it.
Yeah.
What do we see here? I mean,
well, first of all, I want to go back to the hospital situation. I was very pleased, and I know Andrea Khanjin has been really pushing, MPP Khanjin, Minister Khanjin, has really been pushing for provincial funding. In the budget, recent provincial budget, we saw an investment of $15 million that would help go through stage 3 of the hospital plan. And again, it has to do with growth. As you mentioned, we've seen a large influx of people. We've got a city the size of Orillia being built in the south end of Barrie. So, obviously the demand is there. On the college standpoint, I've had lots of conversations with Kevin Weaver, who is the CEO of the college, and there are significant concerns with respect to those foreign students, particularly because much of the labor market needs weren't addressed in the reduction of that foreign student program, right? For example, tourism, there were other areas as well, early childhood education. So the government, really without consultation with the colleges, implemented these reductions in foreign student visas that has caused a problem for our local college, despite the fact that the labor market demands are still there, because the college, according to Kevin, is designing its programs to meet some of the needs of our local area here in Simcoe County. And so I wish, and I know the colleges had wished, that there had been discussion. There's no question that the foreign student program and the work visa program had been oversubscribed. But in our particular case, Georgian is providing those type of programs to meet the labor market demand. So, better consultation, not just unilateral decisions, would have been probably prudent on the part of the government to talk to colleges like Georgian through their representatives and their association to find out just what they were doing in that regard with respect to labor market demands. Overall, the immigration levels that we've seen in this country are unsustainable. This is why we talk specifically about a reduction in immigration. In fact, the Liberal government has also been talking about immigration level reductions because we just don't have the capacity or the infrastructure to deal with it from a housing standpoint, a healthcare standpoint, an education standpoint. We need controlled borders. We don't need open borders. And I mentioned this the last time that I was on the show. The biggest concern with the immigration policy is among those who came to this country under that controlled and that sustained system, who came and contributed to our country economically, starting a business, working, wanting a better life for their family. In many cases, those people were fleeing persecution as well, either for religious reasons or tribal reasons or other reasons. The big concern among immigrant communities right now, and I think it should be broadly concerning to all Canadians, is that when we were once a country that allowed those who were persecuted into it, we're now allowing the persecutors into the country. So in other words, the very people that they were fleeing from are the ones that are coming in. And we see that playing itself out on the streets of our city. We see protests and lawless mobs that are threatening and intimidating particularly Jewish communities in our country. The level of anti-Semitism that has increased is just gross. I'll say it, it's gross. And this is not the kind of Canada that many people fled to, and not the kind of Canada that, I grew up in. And so controlling, not having that open border process, but having a more measured and controlled and sustained immigration system is going to be better for our infrastructure, better for our capacity to deal with it from a healthcare, housing, or education standpoint, but more importantly, to try to control the crime that is pervading our streets. And that crime isn't just the lawless mobs. We're seeing it as well in the drug crisis, fentanyl. We're seeing Mexican drug cartels setting up shop. We're seeing Chinese proxies setting up shop, growing fentanyl labs here in this country, which all of us should agree, at a minimum, is not wanted in this country. And these are the types of things that are causing problems for Canadians.
Now, just as we wrap up in the last minute, conversation with Mayor Alex Nuttall. He also, you spoke about law and crime, et cetera. He does sit as a member of the Barrie Police Service Board as well.
Yep.
Give us 30 seconds of inside baseball, basically, on your relationship or the agreement and the exchange commitment to and from the Mayor of Barrie.
Well, Alex and I have, we've got a long history, almost the same amount of time of 19 years of public service, a little bit of a break for Al. I think he's doing a terrific job as the mayor. He has a council that is working with him, and you've been on council as I have. When you're the mayor and you have a council that's moving in the same direction with the same priorities, and that comes from leadership. And Alex has proven himself to be a leader in this city. He's very ambitious in what he wants to see for the city. But we align on many, many issues, including the issue of crime, making sure that we're cleaning up our streets, giving our police the resources that they need in order to keep our city safe, because that at a minimum is what people should expect. But also more importantly, and this goes to the federal level as well, through bail reform or other changes that are needed to legislation, making sure that we are protecting our police as much as they are protecting us, and making sure that they're able to go home safely to their families, not by allowing repeat offenders, repeat criminals on our streets only to reoffend again, which was another big part of our crime policy platform in the last election. So Al and I have been working great together. I love working with them. I love working with their council, and the same goes with Mayor Dolan in Innisfil. We have a tremendous relationship, always talking, always working together.
Excellent. Yeah. Member of Parliament John Brassard, serving Barrie, South, Innisfil. Thanks for your time, and I do look forward to having you back on the show in the next couple of months just to see a bit of an update, maybe halfway between now and the fall economic statement, if that's possible. But please continue the good fight, and wish you the very best.
Anytime
Thanks
you
for
ask
joining.
me to come out, Arif, I'll be here for sure.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
We will see you next time on Barrie City on the Move. Take care.